Brilliant. I am so excited to be here with an old friend of Aephoria, Sonja Blignaut, and a new friend of Aephoria, Paul Zonneveld. And I would not describe the two of you as speakers, but rather as co-conspirators. So I hope that is okay. One or two things. Paul is a Dutch executive coach and leadership consultant, and he is a leading practitioner and developer, co-developer, and teacher of systemic intelligence. And in the time that I've now gotten to know Paul, what I really appreciate about him is that he really brings an embodied presence to this work. Like you can feel it is in his bones. And so, what we're going to be busy with here today is part a conversation, but maybe part a bit of a transmission as well. And amongst some of the wonderful things he's done, he's co authored the book Emergent. The power of systemic intelligence to navigate the complexity of mergers and acquisitions. So he's the co-author of that book, and we're going to be talking about some of the principles and ideas in that book. And Sonja is a ways finder and a dear friend and someone who has been living complexity for many, many, many years. And I really appreciate the way in which you are leading the way in terms of thinking about how and expressing how we recontract with our worlds at this point in time. So, Sonja, it's wonderful to have you here as well. And we're going to talk about systemic intelligence, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. So, I think to start us off, I want to ask both Sonja and Paul a naughty question because they don't know it's coming. And that is, what is one thing that enlivens or excites you about the conversation that we've invited people to be part of today? Paul, do you want to kick us off there?
Yes, and thank you for all the introductions. Beautiful music in the beginning. What excites me for one of the things is that we don't know what we're going to talk about, because that is exactly the same as systemic intelligence. So, and also to be here together with Sonja, who has a very important name also in South Africa, and has also invited me to bring my work to South Africa. And so we're exploring how that's going to work. So it's wonderful to be here. And I see some other familiar faces from an earlier time here. And even somebody from, Brazil, and somebody from Switzerland, or two actually. So yeah, it's nice. It's really surprising.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. And it's so lovely to have you in our community. Sonja, what excites or enlivens you about today?
I always find these sessions enlivening just because of the warmth in this community, Lucille. But I think to echo Paul, I think the emergent nature of the conversation, and then I'm also very aware that it's kind of two communities meeting, the Enneagram community and the maturity and all the wonderful things that you guys are involved with, and systemic intelligence, and then complexity thrown in the mix, so whenever that kind of a diversity is in the room, there's always this sense of possibility that anything can happen. So yeah, I think that's what I find enlivening.
And if I can add, what I find enlivening is I have really appreciated, because Paul, your conversation with South Africa is a fairly new conversation. I am enlivened by the way in which you're coming into conversation with South Africa. You're coming here and asking questions. You've been on a little site visit. You met lots of people with great curiosity, and you continue to lean into this. It doesn't feel like you're coming here as an expert coming to tell us stuff. It really feels like you're coming to meet us and in some way offer systemic intelligence so it's a mirror back to us in terms of how you're meeting South Africa. And I know not everyone here on this call is from our country, but I deeply respect that. And I respect what that means for what might unfold here.
Thank you very much for that. That's I can only say it's very dear to my heart to be invited here. And knowing the history, of the Dutch coming to South Africa a long, long time ago, and what some of the negative effects of that have been as well. So, yeah, thank you for noticing that.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of connect a couple of dots at the start of the conversation, but maybe the first dot we need to connect is for people here that have not met the term systemic intelligence yet. Paul, do you want to say something more about where systemic intelligence and the book that you wrote came from? And just something about, I don't know if what exactly one would call systemic intelligence, whether it's a method or a lens or a capacity, but just give us a little bit of the backstory and then we'll connect it into some other frameworks that may be better known in this community, like relationship systems coaching, etc.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Well, it came on my path, and that was more the family system way of looking at families as living systems. It came on my path when I was a teacher in neurolinguistic programming 25 years ago. And my initial connection with a family constellation was actually a negative one, because I couldn't fathom what they were doing, and I was curious at the same time. And as I was working in the business world, I was actually more interested in the leadership part of it and the development of how can we see organizations as living systems, as living ecosystems. And where I came from, and especially in the North Atlantic world, there's a lot focus on the individual. And I've been studying about individual development and about values and all the beautiful things that it brings, but there was always something missing in my field. And so when I saw this way of looking at it as a living system, I started to realize that we're not looking at just the behavior, but we're looking at the deeper drivers of how an organization is being run, sometimes by hidden patterns, sometimes by unclear reasons. And there's a lot of everything that we could see above the waterline, as I call it, the symptoms of the behavior. And what do the different behaviors together, what do they mean? Because if we try to solve in an organization every individual behavior, we're never going to be ready, kind of. But what if we could find the hidden patterns that create this? And that's what I also learned from the family work. If we can nudge those, if we can shift those a little bit, a lot of those symptoms will start to move and start to change for the better most of the time, if you know where to touch them. And so I started developing that together with some colleagues, and that was 25 years ago. And I've ever been very enthusiastic and intrigued by it, and especially when I found out that the Cynefin model, where we also talk about complexity, that was exactly the place where the systemic intelligence work has a very big impact. And so finding a place for it, finding the words for it with business people was kind of like the breakthrough, where we started also to think about what can we publish about and what is really happening with, for example, mergers and acquisitions, because both my colleague and I had been involved in it. So it felt a very logical step. And it's a little bit like a marriage, but we can talk about that later.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Just a note, some people say that they're struggling to hear at the end of your sentences, that it's a bit muffled. So
Okay.
maybe just something around that to be aware of. So I want to stitch that in. Sonja, Paul's mentioned Cynefin and complexity. And I know you're also trained as an organization relationship systems coach. And, You know, I always follow some of your curiosities. So something about Paul's work has tickled you. I don't even know if that's the right verb, but there's been a match from your perspective in what you've already been working with and plugging into what Paul's working with. So I'd love to hear from you what clicked when you first met Paul's work.
So how Paul and I met is actually also quite interesting. I see Eduardo is on the call. So the South African and the Dutchman was connected through a Brazilian, which was really interesting. But I think Eduardo already saw, what tickles me. But maybe I think, so as you mentioned, I did do ORSC, organization relationship systems coaching. It's such a mouthful. And when I first spoke to Paul, I could there were resonances there. But my impression even then was, I love ORSC and I use it a lot, but it feels like it's a very broad introduction to many things, but it doesn't, kind of go very deep into, particular things. And what I could see in Paul's work was kind of a depth. After speaking to him, I kind of felt, I wish I had this grounding before I did ORSC. That was kind of what came up for me. But what I love about this from a complexity perspective is also just the practicality of it. I feel like it gives you a very practical way to engage with some of these deeper relational patterns that sit in complexity, because, it's the complexity comes from the interconnectedness, from the relationships. And because this kind of immediately drops into those relationships quite deeply, it gives us a completely different way of working with it. So that's kind of where I started getting excited. And, Paul will talk about his full download process, but after our first meeting, my first response was, we need to bring this work to South Africa, Paul. Also just because there's such diversity and depth in it, even touching on things like ancestral patterns and collective trauma. And, there's just so much in it that I feel just sits squarely within human complexity.
Wonderful. So with that, I know a lot of people here are still wondering, what is systemic intelligence? So Paul, do you want to lead us into a little bit of an exploration? We have coaches here who work, some of them predominantly in the one-on-one field, some of them working in pairs and teams. And some people here are organization development practitioners that work at larger system scale. So we're quite a diverse group of people. Share more with us, and then I think Sonja and I will come in as you go through and maybe pop in some observations or questions.
Okay, and maybe I can ask you, Cerise, to show one slide, which is I think the fourth or the fifth one. Yeah, let's start with the number 4. Well, systemic intelligence is a method. I call it a methodology, but actually it's all the things that you mentioned in the beginning. It's a very practical, very applicable way of working. And even one more, please. And what we're looking at is that this is kind of the nucleus of it. We look at living systems. We look at organizations as living, not as just a structure. The way that we look at organizations as living systems, it's very inclusive. Systemic intelligence is not judgmental. It's non-judgmental. It's not judging the person. It's not judging the individual or the team or the leadership. It is looking at what is really happening in between all the different elements. And we can look at that at every level. We can look at it at a personal level, more at leadership level. We can look at it at team level, at department level, and even at the whole organization in one go. So we're looking at where are the existing relationships healthy and where are they too close together, that's what we call a bind, or too far away from each other. So a bind will say that something will be on your mind all the time, or something will be that you struggle with all the time. Too far out of away from each other will mean that there is no relation, where there should be maybe a relationship. And through this approach, and I'll come to more specifics on that, we're looking for the dynamics that we don't see yet, where we only see the effect of it in behavior, and we call those the hidden dynamics or entanglements. And there are two metaphors that I use very often. One is that of the undertow. In organizations, there are patterns that we don't see, that kind of are happening under the waterline. And these undertows are affecting where there is stagnation in the system. The difficulty is, and that is the beauty of systemic intelligence, the difficulty very often is that those are hidden patterns. They are what we call then under the waterline. And once when my daughter was taking surfing lessons, she had been trying for 3 days, and the main thing she did was fall off the board all the time. And then on the 4th day in the morning, suddenly she had the stance and she stayed on the board all the time. Every little wave where she started, every little wave she took. And I was really surprised. And I asked her, I said, how suddenly do you notice that? How does it work? And I said, oh, but my teacher told me, you have to find the river in the ocean. And I was flabbergasted. I said, what do you mean? Well, you know where the water is. And exactly that metaphor, finding the river in the ocean, is exactly what we do with systemic intelligence. We're starting to find the patterns that either are very supportive for success, for cooperation, for having meetings that are nice and effective, or that are entangled and are creating stagnation in the flow. So how do we look at those systems? And how do we navigate in the complexity of those systems? That is the big question. So we have found that we have 4 navigation principles in this work, systemic intelligence. And I just named them in a brief description. So the first one is purpose. What is the purpose of this system? You can look at that at a larger system as a whole organization, but every other detail of that system needs to have an aligned purpose. Are we aligned with the purpose? Yes or no? And there is something special with purposes, that a purpose can be fulfilled, can be done. And when that happens, there are 2 choices in our work. Either you stop the system, you stop the team, you stop the project, you stop the department, or you find, with the skills and the experience that you have, you find a new purpose. But the purpose is always outside in. So the surrounding area, the ecosystem around the system, the organization, is asking for something that the organization can provide. And that really creates flow. Well, 3 more. One is connection. We just talked about relations. So what are the connections and where do we get stuck? The third one is the order of things. So that's very easy. In most organizations, there is a vertical order from the highest to the all overarching responsibility to the smallest responsibility. And there is a horizontal order that is very new for most organizations. What does that mean? And so if the order is okay, if the order is correct, also energy will flow through the system, and things will happen and be activated. And the fourth one is the exchange of give and take. And that is, how much do you ask of your personnel and how much do you give back? And recently I also read that, for example, burnout is not to blame an individual, it is a symptom of the system. So that is where exchange of give and take is being screwed. And we're not rebalancing, and the balancing is over time. It's not like I ask you something and then immediately I have to give you something back. No, but how do we deal with the human capacity of all the work that we do? Do they have to work over weekends, or can they rest in the weekend? Is just a simple exchange. And one of the other things in exchange also takes part is the honoring of the past, honoring of contributions, honoring the people when they leave, honoring when they arrive. And we see that if that doesn't happen well, then you see all kinds of patterns starting to appear in the organization, but even as a micro level, that an individual might not even be able to produce what normally the person can produce, because the previous person wasn't said goodbye well. And then we call that a contaminated or an occupied place, that whoever then lands on that place cannot be successful, despite all their skills and abilities and brilliance. So all of those are kind of like the little invisibles.
There's so much coming up for me at once. So
Wonderful.
I can see how this work becomes really interesting when systems come together. So your original work around mergers and acquisitions, and at the same time, I'm aware that quite a few of our coaches also work in settings where we're starting up and we're a young entrepreneurial organization with founders, and then founders get replaced as the organization scales up and all kinds of things. So I'm wondering about both what you've learned through your work about mergers and acquisitions. Maybe we start there, and then we can also talk a little bit more about kind of the fast growing organizational space, or the space where founders that are clearly an important space occupier and place in the order of things, when that changes. And I'm going to invite other people to also, like, when you have questions, pop them in the chat. We'll bring them in at different places in time, and we'll invite some of the voices in. But I'm keen to hear what's going on for people, so use our chat. But Paul, your systemic intelligence principles and mergers and acquisitions.
Well, thanks for that question, because what we do with those 4 principles is we check them in mergers and acquisitions. Let's first talk about, well, the term mergers and acquisitions is actually not right, but it is used worldwide, so we use it. Because honestly, I haven't seen a real merger yet. There's always a part of the company or a company that is more, is kind of the takeover, although we call it a merger because it has a nice sound. But actually so we're also looking for who is now laying on top and who's the one that is following. So if we look at, and I think it's a good metaphor, although it's sometimes when we started with it, it wasn't politically correct. My colleague said, I have an idea about mergers and acquisitions, and the work title that I propose is, how can we make a loving marriage out of an organized one? And then immediately we had like, hey, this is not politically correct, but the idea of a marriage, because a marriage, and I'll just give you the example of my own marriage. I come from a whole family system. with ancestors and things and culture. And my wife comes from a completely different one. When we got married, everything was rosy, but like most of the time it is in the beginning. And then at a certain moment, she had promised me a certain Dutch dish for the evening dinner. We kind of like trade places of cooking. And in my family, you eat that dish with a sausage. In her family, they did that a little bit different. So when I came home in the evening and she had already been cooking, she said, why don't you sit at the table and bring in the food? So she did. I was already looking forward to my sausage. And she puts the food on the table and I look at my plate and I'm like, where's the sausage? There was a meatball. Can you imagine? There was a meatball. That's not a sausage. And I was flabbergasted and I was like, why don't you bring this with a sausage? You eat this with a sausage. And she said, no, you eat this with a meatball. And so we started arguing up till a certain moment that we both realized, oh, my dear, we are just protecting our own family systems. Because this is how we do it, and this is how you did it or do it. And in that moment, we started to realize that we had to define what would become our system instead of being still in the old system of our upbringing. The same works in organizations. So what we do with organizations is we let them look at those 4 navigating principles and ask them questions about every navigating principle. So we ask questions, what is your purpose? Very simple. How aligned do you feel that you are on a scale of 0 to 100? We ask them about connections. What do you need to do to stay to belong to your system? And what can you never do? Because then you're being kicked out of your system. On order, we ask them, what are the criteria for order in your system? Is that just your rank, your title? Is that your contribution? Is that whatever? And also in the horizontal, every peer system, everybody in a team, in the horizontal, there's also an order. Sometimes it's seniority. Sometimes it is the amount of years that you have been a specific part of the skill that is needed in the team. Sometimes it is the country that you originate from. Sometimes it is the country that, are you from the country that founded the organization? We have even had that if you speak eloquently, the most eloquently speaking person is higher in the order. So you can't imagine what kind of, well, say, variation of criteria is in order. And then the last question about the give and take and the exchange, we only ask one question, and that question is, where is energy leaking, draining? And we ask that at both parties, separate from each other. And then they start to share it, and then we start to look, where are the things kind of aligned, and where are the deepest risks that this is going to go totally wrong? Where do we don't see any alignment possible, and we need to develop something new, like what my wife and I did, not protecting our family systems, but creating a new direction for our system. And so we start to work with them at that level first, because all the behavior will come from that. And when they start answering those questions, they are super surprised what the other party is talking about. Sometimes it even feels alien to them. So, and that is the deepest level that I can imagine that we can look at organizations. And if we can start at that deep bottom level, from there we can build up all the other parts. And some of our clients have even said, normally it takes us about 3 years to really integrate the teams. And they found that in some situations it was less than a year, or it was even only 3 months. So it's also very practical and simple.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really get that sense of like bringing the undercurrent, the undertow into awareness. The things that
Exactly.
we'll only surprisingly figure out when people get upset with each other and don't know why in some way. And for me, there's some connection here to one of the principles inside the Enneagram, which is the law of three, which is you have a thesis and an antithesis, and the synthesis is the way in which we kind of pull the system into the next level of awareness. So in knowing we have this way of looking at it and that way of looking at it, and then in the conversation, the third possibility becomes
Wonderful.
possible.
Exactly.
That would be a link there. Sonja,
Absolutely.
just briefly bringing you in, what's bubbling for you at the moment in the conversation?
I'm just struck, Lucille, even when, so I've heard this before from Paul, and I'm just struck by how when we do our due diligence for things like mergers and acquisitions, it strikes me we're not asking the right questions. We tend to focus so much, and I remember a few years ago, I actually was in conversation with the head of OD for one of our big insurance companies, and they were in kind of just post a big merger. And I remember her saying to me, culture doesn't matter. It's all about the processes and the systems that need to come together. And I was like, but I think this really honors the kind of human complexity that emerges when two systems come together. So I think it would just be it would increase the potential for mergers to be successful if we did this upfront and not only afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, on the chat, there's a question about you sharing more about connections.
Yeah, and I also saw that somebody was asking about, are you going to send something about those navigation principles? And the answer is yes. We will send you a handout where we describe how you can navigate through those 4 principles, and that's more elaborate than we talk about it here. Connections. Connection and order, I want to take those two together because they create, let me say it differently. My co-author describes this like if you have a purpose, she compares that to, okay, you have a place where you want to build the building. And then you have to determine, to build the building, how many people do you need to build the building. So that is the part of the connection, who is in and who is not in, who's part of this system and who's not part of the system. And then when the building has been built and you come in and you want to go work there, you want to know, where is my place? In the old times it was, where is my office? Now it is, where is a chair I can sit on and find my place in the hall. So connections is about how do we relate to each other and with each other? Are we in a team working together? Or is it always on one person and everybody else let that person be excluded? So it's about inclusion and exclusion as patterns. And connections also has to do with place. So we expect everybody who belongs to the system to have a place, and not only have a place, but to take their place. In other words, to take their responsibility of having that place. That's one part of the connection. How do you connect to your role and to your place? The other part of connection is also, what do we exclude? In other words, you could also say, what are we not allowed to talk about? Are emotions accepted in this system or not? Are innovations accepted in this system, or do we have to continue the way we do it all the time? And the thing is, everything that you exclude has a huge impact on the system and will eventually, what I call, haunt the system. It will create a negative pattern, especially if you don't make it aware. So if the agreement is, okay, we don't do about emotions here, then people have a choice to be there or not to be there. But if it is hidden and things are excluded, that is really going to be what we call a ghost in the system. And the other thing about connections, and I use the word energetic umbilical cord, that everybody creates loyalty to an organization, loyalty to the place in the organization or the role that you have. When you leave the system, you have to cut the energetic umbilical cord to be free from the system itself, so that you can move into a different system. That could be a different company, it could be individual work that you're going to do, or you're going on your own. But if you don't cut that connection, if you don't, you will see certain symptoms. And I've been privy of it, and I've been also guilty of it. That when I moved from one company to another, that I went to the new company and told them how good we were doing in the old company that I worked for, or the previous company. So I came with all kinds of solutions. Well, you're doing okay, but maybe this is better, this is better. And actually, I was almost completely excluded in the form of being kicked out, because I was not even honoring their way of doing it. And I immediately wanted my way of it to be pushed into. So connection is a large container of things. Is how do you connect with things? What do you exclude, and are you aware of that? And also, how do you take your place and how do you leave your place?
That brings me back to wanting to hear your thoughts about founders. And then I'll leave it over to you to share a little bit more, because founders that leave a system at some point, I can see that there might be big ghosts there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Founders are very important in the systemic intelligence way of looking, because the founder is one of the few people that really belongs to the organizational system, no matter how large it grows or how small it stays. The founder is the one that what we call picks up the spark, the idea or the impetus to say, I'm going to organize something. I'm going to create an organization. I'm going to create an entrepreneurial situation. That one is the first one that takes a risk. Everybody else who joins this person doesn't have to take the risk, or the risk is much smaller. The founder also brings in his or her values, brings in his or her experience. And to make a long story short, in the book Built to Last, and it's an oldie, I had to read it when I was working at Kimberly-Clark, and Kimberly-Clark was part of the examples in that book. Every company, and there was only companies who were older than 100 years. Every company who's older than 100 years still knows the story about the founding of this company and the founder's name. That is how important the founder creates the roots. Let's see an organizational system as a tree. If people know, if the stem of the tree knows what the roots are, the tree can really grow big and flourish. If we cut the tree from the roots, it's going to die. So also in mergers and acquisitions, you have to honor the roots of each company. And even if the company is a combined company of a previous merger, you honor them all. So founders need to be honored in the way that they are still having a name in the organization. That is juice, the blood of the organization initially. Does that mean that you can't change the purpose of the organization because the founder also puts that in? No, at a certain moment, and for example, 3M started as a mining company and eventually is now a company that mainly works in healthcare. with all kinds of tapes and stuff that sticks on wounds and all that. So they have gone through a lot of different changes in purpose. They still know where they come from. And they still have that innovational spirit of the founder, which they have preserved. Now, when a founder leaves, sometimes founders leave because of the growth of the organization. Because a founder sometimes has only the energy to found something, to start something, has the starting energy. But when it starts to grow at a certain moment, in the beginning, there's no order necessarily. You know, it's a small group of people working together, having fun. They know who's the boss because that's the founder and he pays the bills and stuff. But when it starts to grow, you start to see that we need to organize it, and that order comes into place. And then we have departments, and then etc., etc., etc. Sometimes the founder doesn't have the energy or the skills to manage structure in the organization, to manage the next level of the evolvement of the organization from puberty into adolescence, from adolescence into adulthood. So when they can leave with honors, then it can be clean and be a clean goodbye. And leave with honors can be a big party, it can be, you can name it, whatever works for this person. If you leave with a grudge, it is negative for the system itself because it becomes a memory in the system that can reappear many years later. It can also be bad for the founder leaving. When he still has a grudge, it means he is in a bind with the former organization. And if he wants to become multi-entrepreneurial, that's calling him or her back. So how the founder leaves is very important, both for the company that the founder leaves, but also for the founder, him or herself. Am I clean? Have I cut the umbilical cord so that I can really stand in my power again and do something else? In family systems, that mostly happens after 2 or 3 generations, where, you know, and that's a whole different story. If we talked a little bit in our first call about pairs. Well, in a family business, there's a lot of pairs going on, and actually there are 2 systems. You have the family system, you have the business system that are entangled. And very often we create a family governance and look at it systemically. What are the patterns of the family? And an organizational governance. What are the organizational patterns? What are the patterns the organization needs, and which are maybe even toxic from the family system? But also realizing, how do you address your brother in the company? Can you address your brother in the company as, hey, you are the senior manager, or you're my younger brother? And do you make, and very often we don't clarify which hat we are wearing when we speak to somebody, especially in a family system. Am I speaking to you as the older brother, or am I speaking to you as the one who takes the orders from you? Mm. And also there we have to clarify it. Otherwise we have all these entanglements and sometimes even toxic elements that stop the organization from really thriving as they could. Mm. So it's nice and complex.
Nice and complex, but also so wonderful to actually bring the conversation into the spoken part of the organization. So maybe you want to share a couple of things, and then we'll do a breakout for people to go and play with some of the systemic intelligence ideas, Paul.
Okay, no. Let me just quickly run through a couple of pairs that I've prepared. Cherise, if you could show me number 6. This one, yeah. So one pair, very often unrealized that it's also a pair, is you and your professional role. And I have a couple of lovely faces in front of it. So, and we just talked about, how do you take your place? And can you take your place fully? Are you free to step into that role? And with promotions, the role is always bigger than you are ready for. So that's your growth edge. And also, can you part well? Part well from the role, or part well from the department, from the organization, whatever size it is. Because otherwise the energy keeps leaking. So that is one pair. Can you show me I think I also talked about the second one, family business. Can you show that one, please, Therese? Yeah. In the family system or family business, the interesting question is, which system is leading here now? So when you're in a meeting with family members and non-family members, and to make it more complex, some of the non-family members might also have shares. So you have 3 different groups. Then the question, which system or which group is leading is very important to know who you're talking to. Is it somebody who can make a final decision? Or is it somebody who has money invested in the company, who is not a family member? But is the family system always leading? Or is the highest service to the organization the leading edge for this system? And does the family and the business have to move there together? Because sometimes the interest of the family might be contradictory to the interest of the organizational development. So which system is leading here? You can obviously, in every organization, you can have subsystems, and you can think of many, many different ones. That's what we also explore in the training, but this is an important one for especially family businesses. And if I give you one more, the next one, please, Therese. Yeah. Power difference in pairs, and especially in more modern organizations or startups. Very often, the power differences are shifting, especially in fast-moving organizations, in just growing scale-ups, because the order hasn't been set yet. We're still trying to find how do we structure this. And then one day somebody can be like, oh, well, I'm in lead now. And then the project changes a little bit, and then somebody else comes in the lead, because order should be flexible in some way. And if we clarify and make aware what the order is in this project, for example, it could be that the project leader is somebody who is not the highest in rank in the structure of the organization, in the vertical. And maybe even his or her boss is partition taking in the project. So now they have role reversal in the order. So if you don't clarify that, it might be that this one keeps stepping up all the time because he or she sees still his or her employee. So you have to clarify what is the current order of things, and also in the exchange honor that. Otherwise it becomes more push down, that everything that somebody who feels I'm in rank higher is going to push everything through. And that means that immediately other parts are going to be excluded. And even with good intentions, what you do is you kind of like create all kinds of entanglements that will later start stagnating the organization. It's never happening immediately in the moment. It's always a little bit later. So that's why also one of our interventions or nudges is to create a timeline with the organization. And not just create the timeline, say, on the wall. We'd like to have the timeline on the ground. Because then people can stand in the timeline and sense with their body the body is a very important sensing mechanism in systemic intelligence. Sense with their body what's happening there, or what was happening there even. That sounds maybe a little bit vague, but you know how it feels when you are in an organization and you stand next to the office of the CEO. If you really start to sense with your body when you're standing there, you might feel a little bit more tension from people that are passing by than when you stand in a cafeteria. Yeah, so our bodies are sensing mechanisms, but most of the time we don't use their information. While in systemic intelligence, it is very important information. Because how could we otherwise find those hidden patterns, those invisible patterns? We find them because we include sensing. And a very beautiful example that a friend of mine recently gave me, she said, if you look in the analytical world, as she calls it, above the waterline, when we have a problem, what we try to do is to solve it and to find other examples how we solve a similar problem. And we cut it in pieces and we dissect it and we start to look for details and more details. That can be a very good way in the complicated world. It's a linear approach. If we exclude the other part, the under the waterline, the undercurrent looks at the problem not as a problem, but as a symptom of something larger. So if my son is showing problematic behavior, I'm not going to look at his behavior. I'm going to look at the larger system in which he shows this behavior to find out where is the moment that I can intervene or that I can do something or that he can do something.
Can I ask a question, because this tickles something for me? I'm wondering a little bit about the systems we work in where there are contract renewals or elections or changes of guard that are cyclical. And in this river, this undercurrent, when we stand in the river, do you sometimes have people stand in the future? So, as in the contract renewal is, or the election is next year or November this year. Let's stand in November. And what do we feel when we stand there? Because it's, I mean, there's something so evocative about standing in the river and sensing what's going on here. But I wonder about standing in the future.
I'm so happy that you asked this question. Actually, we're currently doing it. Sonja and I had a conversation this afternoon about how can we stand in the future? How can we bring this to the future? But yeah, we do. We also, you take something from the current or from the past even, and what would happen if we step with that one step into the future? And what does my body give? What kind of response do I get? What kind of words are coming up? Is there tension? Can I really stand there? Or do I feel that my feet are uneven? Or I can't even feel the ground, although I'm standing there? So it can give you a lot of information. The thing is, you have to build it from the start, preferably if the information is available, because that is the origin of the whole stream, although it might have twisted and turned a little bit. Yeah, definitely. There is still, and we haven't explored much of that yet, I must admit. I think there is more to explore.
Yeah, I think there's something very interesting there. And so how interesting. I was not in that conversation with you and Sonja. I had no idea that you spoke about standing in the future, but maybe my body was sensing some of that conversation.
Exactly. And that's how it works. And if we take that for, not just for okay, that is the truth. We never say this is the truth in systemic intelligence work. We say, this is interesting. Let's explore. And then we do like safe to fail experiments or other things. And I think that one of the things that we do is something that I'd love to share with everybody who's here. And maybe we can make that bridge to do that. Cerise, do you have the breakouts ready? Not that people have to fly there yet, just to be sure. And can you show us the slide of the 10th one? Yeah. So I'm going to invite groups of 4 to be together and to not waste too much time on who's A, B, C, and D. Everyone is one of the people. So you have person A. Person A brings in a current case. That could be something simple, personal. That could be something from a team. It could be something, work that you do with a client. It could be something from a larger organization. You choose. Person B listens with the body mainly. So you listen, what is happening in my body while person A is speaking about the case, the situation. Person C, as a double task, listens through the 4 systemic questions on the right. And we'll keep this one open, or can we also bring this one into the breakout room, please? Okay, super. So you will be able to see those 4 systemic questions. So who's person C will look through these questions and just notice which of these questions becomes most inviting to me to ask. You don't immediately do that. You wait till person A is done. And person D listens for the content. What is the person A telling? When person A is done, person B can report out what happened in my body. Person A is just observing how that possibly resonates with him or her body. Person C will ask one systemic question to person A. And person A might respond or might just notice what it does with him or her. And then eventually person D asks an analytical question going into the content. And for person A again, to see how that lands in you. And there is no right or wrong in this. This is just about exploring. And in total, you have 15 minutes, so maybe maximum 5 minutes of case bringing. Maybe even less, 3 would be better. Just the core things. Everybody does their job, C, B, C, and D. Then you feedback or you ask the question. And then if you have a little bit of time, you can still reflect on how this was for us to do? What kind of information did it give us? So wherever you go on your reflection, that's where you go. And we'll call you back in 15 minutes. And then we'll love to hear some voices of what you've experienced. Any questions about that?
I've popped all the tasks and the timings in the chat, so that should go with you to your breakouts. And Charisse, I think if you can pop us out, that would be great.
Great. I am going to pop you into the rooms now. Can I just ask Paul and Sonja, please do not leave. I have put you into a room, but don't go there. Yeah, and then we've got 4 people in all the rooms. So I'm opening the rooms and we will see you shortly.
The other rooms are still finishing off, so they'll be back in about 20 seconds. And then we're going to just bring in some of our awarenesses, what's come up for us, and questions for the last couple of minutes we have for this session. So if you want to think about that already, you're welcome. And here comes the rest of the crew. So welcome back, everyone. Hopefully that was an interesting experiment. This is an experiment, a safety fail experiment in some way. in applying something that you're that maybe is coming through to you in part through conversation and part through transmission. So I'd love to hear from people anything that you'd like to share with the larger group around what that experience was like, or anyone who has a question for Paul and Sonja at this point in time. So you can just unmute yourself or pop your hand up. I'm just seeing who'd like to share. What struck you about that conversation? What was it like? Any questions? Tracy,
Happy
and
to
then
be.
Adi.
Just thank you. That was a lovely conversation, and being heard by 3 other people and having the space to actually talk and share was powerful. And having them share what they were feeling, hearing, and giving me another question to explore, and then rounding it off with the analytical was incredibly powerful. So thank you. And they open to feel free to share if they would like to. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tracy.
Adi, your hand was also up.
Sure. It was amazing how quickly we slotted into who was doing what. And then just actually for me, certainly being new to doing this, actually how we arranged the order of how we did that as we went along. And for me, asking the analytical question, possibly I wasn't listening enough to the rest of the other answers in terms of the continuity, but the benefits seem to still have been derived by the person who was presenting the case. I don't want to speak on their behalf, but for me, very interesting exercise. Thank you.
Adi, did the conversation feel different to if we were just to have a general discussion, given the specific roles that people took? Do you think that shifted the way in which the conversation unfolded?
Again, maybe it's useful for the person who presented, but I would say based on how they fed back to us at the end, yes, because it exposed something that would seem to have been really useful for them and also hadn't been perceived in this manner before or observed in this manner before.
Paul, is there some method to the roles that you gave people? Do you want to just let us into the secret of that design? I know we're running out of time, but I'd love to hear more.
It's not such a big secret. It's just using all the capabilities that we have. So we have a brilliant brain. We're very good at analytical, etc., which is the last question. So listening through the connections, not necessarily through the connection, but how can we segment? Where does it fit? What is the root cause? Then we have a body that gives us a lot of information, and very often that resonates with the case giver. Like, yeah, I do have this belly pain all the time when I think about it. So it says something. It gives you additional information. It might also give you the information that when you think about it and it doesn't hurt anymore, something has shifted. And the systemic way is always looking at a little bit larger area than what most of the people are looking at. With analytical, you kind of like zoom in. With systemic, you zoom out. And suddenly you start to see the event in a larger frame, which gives you, most of the time, what is the pattern here. And so there are 3 different frequencies, 3 different ways of observing, of guiding, and you can use that in one-on-one coaching as well. Just ask the person about, or be aware of your physical and embodied experiences, and just feed them back to the client. And the client very often will say, "Oh yeah, I felt that." So it is what we have, but what we haven't used that all the time, or not often enough. Most of the time we go into one direction because that is our direction. But what if all those directions would become yours? And what would that make possible for the client, for the coachee, or for the business client?
Yeah. it kind of connects. So I'm just pulling connections through. It connects to how we think in the Enneagram world about the head, the heart, and the gut intelligence in some way as well. And I'm really connecting the dots to Ian McGilchrist's work on the master and his emissary, for those of you that are familiar with Ian's work. So we have come to time. And Paul, I want to give you a moment to just share more about the big download as an opportunity. And then we'll end off.
Wonderful. So thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about that. I have created what I call my life's work, which is the systemic intelligence work. And I've created a training around that, which I've called the full download. And in that, I download everything to participants, maybe to you, what I've learned, what I've experimented, and what I'm using and what is useful in working with organizations, in working with leaders. That is the focus of the work. And together with Sonja and some others, we have started to develop a program also for South Africa, which is more of a conversation with South Africa than just I come from Europe and I dump it on you. I'm not that kind of person. I don't want to do that. I want to dance with you more. I might not be the best dancer, but you can enjoy it. And so we talk about what is a system and how can you recognize systems? What are subsystems? What is the systemic intelligence in depth and in the experience? How to navigate. And you'll get that article, but also what is the experience of navigating? How do you do constellations? It's not that difficult, but how do you do it on the table? How do you do it online? What are the bigger ones that we can do in organizations, with organizations? What are also the no-nos that we shouldn't do in organizations? Doing individual work in the face of your peers in a company is, to me, an absolute no-no, because it becomes way too dangerous. That person is going to be too exposed, and you never know what you're going to do with it. So there are rules and there are guidelines and there are boundaries. And what I've learned from the first two groups that I led in Europe is that it enhances and deepens your presence in the moment, your presence in daily life. And you will, even when you walk the streets, your sensitivity will be even more than you already have. You can even feel, if you come a year later to a situation in the city where there was an accident, that you will feel a different vibration there than when you walk the rest of the street, for example. And it's not that you need to do that, but what I want to point out is that you become more sensitive to what's happening around you, what's happening with your client, and you can come to deeper solutions for your client. We start October 26th, and we have an early bird till end of July, but for this group, I'm easily to stretch it a little bit because I have decision rights on it, so that's easy. But that is about the full downloads, and and we'll send a link with all the other information that we sent you. But thank you for the opportunity.
So to everyone here, thank you for being part of this session and using Aephoria language. I think one of the things that you would have sensed through this is, from a maturity perspective, Paul's work helps us to really lean into post-conventional logics and to grapple not just with strategizing systemic logic, but also with the presencing of the transforming logic. And it's a deep, deep gratitude we have for the generosity, Sonja, always of your time, and the beautiful family that you weave into our Aephoria landscape. And Paul, thank you for bringing your wisdom and for the generosity that comes with downloading a life's work, and sharing that with others as part of what you do. So thank you for your generosity here. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this conversation. Sonja, last word for you. Anything you want to share?
I just wanted to say thank you for inviting us into your space again, Lucille. It's always such a pleasure to spend time with your community. So thank you.
Thanks. Paul, last word from you, and then we'll close off.
There's also just a big, humble thank you and also for how you led this conversation, because we could just, like I said, we danced together, and yeah, I'm really, really humbled and honored, and also with South Africa, so it's something special.
Thank you. Let's all unmute and just say goodbye in one cacophonous, joyous love bath to Paul and Sonja and to each other.
Goodbye,
Thank you,
goodbye,
everyone.
Thank you very
goodbye,
much.
goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.